Velasco, and thank you for reading.
Manny Pacquiao, I suppose, I don't think there will be a problem for Manny.
Has its share of great fights. But every once in a while, human mind can also be controlled and muscle.
Only here para sa bayan. And that's the opening bell for Round by Round, presented by Eastern Communications. Paboy Pilipinas, welcome world. I'm Boy at Sison.
And I'm Ryan Sangalia. Nicia Casiano joins us later on in the show.
We've been seeing how the Pac-Man's son, Jimel Pacquiao, is already starting to really get interested to join the fight game. But here is our question. Aside from Jimel, how many second-generation Filipino fighters are there? And how many have really made a dent in the fight game? We've listed a few names here, mga kaibigan, and let's run them down with the boxing expert, Mr. Songalia. Ryan, we have a few names here on our list. Of course, let's start off with Lucita Espinoza. Not many people know that his father was a boxer as well. Tell us that story.
Yeah, it came as a surprise to me as well. But because I was actually researching for a school project once, just trying to figure out where all the great Filipino boxers are from, and listening by province. And I realized that Lucita Espinoza was probably like the only one that he listed his residence as being in Manila, because Manila doesn't usually turn out a lot of boxers. I'm like, is he really from Manila? And then I looked where his father was from. His father was from the province. And his father was a boxer too. In fact, his father fought maybe the greatest bantamweight of all time, Eder Joffre from Brazil. So his father was no slouch.
Following in the father's footsteps, of course, Luisito made a better name for himself as far as the boxing game is concerned. How do boxers who have like fathers that are boxers as well, how does that figure out? Is the pressure on them really that great? More so if the father was successful.
Well, it depends really, because I think that it matters if they were successful but not too successful, right? So I think the greatest balance between having a father who was a good enough boxer that he had the mindset and the know-how to lead his son would probably be Floyd Mayweather Sr. and Jr. Floyd Mayweather Sr. was a very talented boxer in his own right, but personal problems outside the ring, going to prison, kind of held his career back. So Floyd Jr. didn't have the silk pajamas, so to speak, that can soften up a boxer. But it's hard to find great fighters whose children were good boxers or champions as well. I think the only one I could think of that where I could say, okay, this guy was a world champion and then his son also became, was Leon Spinks and Corey Spinks, but it's very rare.
Let's now run down more Filipino second-generation boxers. We have here in our list Marvin Sonsona, Jimel Magramo. Of course, a lot of people know Jerry and Dodi Boy Peñalosa, who are the sons of Carl Peñalosa Sr. Of course, we just mentioned Jimel Pacquiao, but we'll tackle Jimel Pacquiao a little bit later on as we have this discussion. So with regards to Sonsona, Magramo, and you have a very interesting story about Carl Peñalosa as well as his sons, right, Ryan?
Oh yeah, it's so funny because I'm close with the Peñalosas, and we joke about this sometimes because I would always see Rene Barrientos, the great 130-pound champion, from years past. He's around. He's very active on Facebook. So he fought Carl Peñalosa Sr. twice back in the '60s, and one story that was relayed to me was after their first fight, Carl Peñalosa Sr. was so tight about it that very upset about the decision. He waited in the parking lot afterwards to fight Rene Barrientos on the street, and Barrientos said, listen, we could do this right now, we could fight here for free, or we could come back a month later, do the rematch and get paid for it. So Carl Sr. thought better of it, said, okay, we'll do the rematch. Barrientos beat him in the rematch, but they did get paid. And so I I would always tease Jerry about it. Like, hey, Jerry, did Jerry hear about that story? And, he paused for a second and then he smiled. Yeah, I heard about that. So, yeah,
No,
we're kind of confirmation there.
never fight until you're sure you're gonna get paid, right?
Yeah, you know what? You guys are professionals. Get that money. You got to pay the bill somehow.
Right.
Speaking of tough guys in the street, right? Because like Marvin Sonsona, was a
Right.
world champion, won the WBO 115-pound champion. His father, I met his father covering the Pacquiao camps down in General Santos City. Ben Sampson, he was a pro from 84 to 89. He had some losses, but none of his losses were ever by knockout. And Marvin Sonsona, very talented fighter in his own right, maybe definitely an underachiever. But when I met his father, I was like, man, his father was the real tough guy of the two. I remember his father kind of like putting him in headlocks and stuff like that and playing rough with him. Like, Marvin's one of the hardest punching pound for pound fighters that's ever lived in the Philippines. But the father was like, not at all, like, this is my son.
How about Jimel Magramo, who's active at the moment, Ryan?
Well, actually, I have an interesting story about his father too, Melvin Magramo. So Melvin Magramo fought from 1990 to 2003. Didn't have like the prettiest looking record, but he did have he crossed paths with a great fighter that we mentioned earlier, Manny Pacquiao. When Pacquiao was coming up, they fought in Cebu, and Rick Staheli, who was Pacquiao's trainer at the time, he was telling me a story about how, first of all, there's no video footage of this fight. So this is only like hearsay, but apparently Manny was out on his feet in that fight at one point. He got rocked really hard, got caught cold because Manny wanted to glove up and get to the ring, didn't warm up. In the first round, Magramo catches him with a right hand, and Manny is basically out. Staheli had to do some things to kind of, buy some time for his fighter. I think there was something with involving gloves or something like that. There was a delay, but Manny was basically, he fought the fight, the entire fight on autopilot, out on his feet. So Magramo, a tough character. Doesn't matter what his record is. You get in the ring with him, you know you were in a fight.
We have about a minute or so for this discussion. How much of the sons or the second generation were able to really take on the style of the father? How many of them more or less mimic the styles of their fathers?
I would say not so much, actually, because I would say that the next generation, they were, from what I can gather, I haven't seen some of these other fighters, but they were a little bit more scientific. They started in different programs. They had more amateur backgrounds. The sport had changed. It became less about, the brawling style. It was science. Like you look at Marvin Sonsona. Sonsona was going through all of like the Batang Pinoy, all the different tournaments. The Peñalosa brothers were top amateurs in the country. I think it's very different, but it just shows the evolution of the sport.
Finally, let's have a quick discussion about Jimwell. How do you think Jimwell will be faring? If he really indeed wants to take this seriously, how will he be fighting in the shadow of his, legendary father?
I mean, it'd be very hard to imagine he even comes close, or anyone ever comes close to what Manny does. So it would be tough living in his shadow. But the one thing that I do like about it is that Jimwell seems to really want to fight. So this was not a matter of his father pressuring him to fight. This was, Jimwell was in his room. He had all of his father's fights on his phone, watching his fights. Manny tried to discourage him. But when his son said, listen, this is what I want to do, Manny said, all right, I'm not going to stand in the way of you doing this, but, you're going to have to train. I think that there will be a certain point where if Jimwell gets out of his comfort zone, he's going to go places where people don't care who his father is. And then we're going to have to see. But when I can tell, he's got a pretty good right hand.
And now on our second topic of discussion today, we will now talk about the flyweight division and how it is shaping up as per the rankings of Ring Magazine. And you will see that list on your screens. We have names like, of course, at the top of the list is Julio Cesar Martinez, and then Yunto Nakatani, Sonny Edwards, Artem Dalakian, Moruti Amtlane, Ricardo Sandoval, Christopher Rosales, and at number 8 at the moment is Mac Williams Arroyo. But I just want to ask you, Ryan, as far as there's an entry here called named Weeks on the List. And it staggers me that Entlane has been on the list for 220 weeks.
Yeah, because you got to remember, he has been going back because he had a lot of problems managerially, but he's been a top flyweight since his 2008 fight with Nonito Donaire. Like, he gave Donaire a real scare in that fight. You know, that was a very tough time because if not for Matalani getting cut, that could have been a very long 12 rounds for Nonito. So I think Matalani has a real argument of being the greatest boxer ever from South Africa. You know, I think the problem with him was that he didn't get the exposure he deserved, but he was a champion. He was champion multiple times. Up until Sonny Edwards outboxed him later on, you know, earlier this year, no one had really challenged Matalani. So he never became the star that his talent may have suggested he could become. But people in the know really respected Matalani.
Alam nyo mga kaibigan, kung makikita nyo on this list, the top 4 all have belts, while the lower 4 do not. As of the moment. Am I right, Ryan?
Yes. And it just shows this is a division really in flux. You know, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this because, you know, Jimmo McGrath, who was fighting this week for the OPBF flyweight title, he could get back in the mix here and fight one of these champions as a result. And what we see right now is there isn't really a focal point of the division. You have 4 different champions who you know, you know, you have Martinez, who's fighting in the U.S., you know, as part of the zone. Sonny Edwards, who's in the U.K. Artem Dalakian. Hopefully one day he'll start fighting more frequently. He's been kind of inactive and under the radar since he beat Brian Valoria to become the WBA title holder. And then you have Nakatani, who's fighting in Japan. So, you know, it's almost like we have 4 different leagues here. So it would be really interesting to see who kind of comes to the fore and makes his mark as, look, I'm the dominant champion.
Will we be seeing a lineal champion anytime soon? I mean, will they start matching up against each other? I'm talking about the top 4 to be able to create or to have a lineal champion. Do you think there's a prospect that will happen before or maybe late this year or maybe early next year? Will that happen?
Then the lighter weights, this is the problem, is because like a lot of the champions at those lighter weights, they are kind of like regional draws. Like you're not going to see like how we had Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. These were 2 guys that came together. They had names, and it didn't matter where you put the fight. You could have put the fight in Iceland, and you would have drew money there. When it comes to like Martinez has not really. No, he's rated number 1 by the ring, but he hasn't really established himself as a star. He's still fighting on undercards. He's, you know, he really kind of emerged out of nowhere when he had that great performance against Charlie Edwards. You know, it was called a no contest, you know, because, you know, I thought that should have been a knockout. You know, he hit him with a body shot when he was already on the floor, and Martinez was just destroying Edwards. Was the guy who convinced Edwards that it was time to move on and leave that division. But you know, Nakatani, I think, is a very tough fight for anybody in that division. A lot of people in the Philippines may know him because he had knocked out Milan Malindo. Sonny Edwards, he had the delayed fight against Jason Mama. That's a mandatory challenge. You know, a Filipino is going to be fighting in the UK when Edwards recovers from his injury. So all these fighters have some. They have all their different styles. You know, I would love to see like almost like a Final Four, have like a tournament and establish some supremacy there, because this is a division that can make for a lot of good fights. If they could do like a Super 6 style type of tournament, I think that would be great, because it's great for boxing when we know who the best fighter is. I wouldn't imagine seeing any unifications in the next 12 to 18 months at 112, unfortunately.
And we will be keeping an eye out for the newer developments as far as the flyweight division in succeeding episodes of the program. And now for the next segment of today's episode, we now turn it over to our colleague, Nisi Icasiano.
Thanks, Ryan and Boyet. The sport of boxing has witnessed a lot of change, evolution, so to speak, through the years ever since its first recorded boxing match on January 6, 1681. From increasing the number of rounds and then decreasing it, to changing the weigh-in procedures, to even improving the specs of boxing gloves, the sport has seen many developments which led us to its modern-day iteration. The same goes with the dynamics inside the ring. As the years passed, the level of competition stepped up, and more boxers learned to embrace the scientific aspect of boxing, with many boxers starting to employ a much more technical and strategic approach in the early 2010s. Fans missed the in-your-face action inside the ring. This was what DirecTV's Big Knockout Boxing, also known as BKB, had in mind when they established the promotion in 2013. They claimed to be a reboot of boxing with a new twist, similar to XFL na in-establish ni Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon of WWE tried to compete with NFL in football with his own football league. Similar din sa basketball, nagkaroon ng slam ball. Kung maaalala po natin, yung slam ball yung basketball kung saan nakaka-slam dunk sila using a trampoline. Ngayon, sa BKB, ganun din po. BKB introduced a unique format wherein fighters square off on a 17-foot circular platform with inclined walls referred to as the pit. The pit has no ropes or corners. It's much smaller than a traditional boxing ring, forcing the boxers to engage in a all-out trade of punches. A padded safety zone lines the outer portion of the pit, giving boxers a chance to retreat as a measure of defense, but will be given a standing 8 count by the referee. So in BKB, rounds last only 2 minutes, with 5 rounds for non-title matches and 7 rounds for championship bouts. Some fighters took up the BKB challenge, and that included former middleweight title challenger Gabriel Rosado. Nandito rin po, sumali rin si Brian Vera. And in the first title match, Rosado won the inaugural BKB middleweight championship against Vera via TKO in its very first event held in August 2014. BKB took it up a notch, holding 2 more events in 2015. Among the notable names who rode on the hype included Shane Mosley Jr., the son of the legendary Shane Mosley. It was an ambitious new combat sport, but like the XFL of Vince McMahon for football and slam ball for basketball, it failed to live up the hype. The goal was to restore the highlight reel knockouts in the ring, but it wasn't the case, as most of the bouts resulted in decisions. The first event only had 4 knockouts, the next had 3, while the very last event of BKB, nagkaroon lang ng isang knockout. After the third event, we haven't heard from DirecTV and BKB anymore. I guess knockouts weren't that big in big knockout boxing. And that's the short-lived existence of BKB. Back to you, Boyd and Ryan.
Thank you, Nisi. And now let's go to our fearless forecast brought to you by Eastern Communications. And what we're going to be focusing on today is that on the 23rd of October, a member of the illustrious Elordi clan, practically considered royalty here in the Philippines as far as boxing is concerned, and one of their younger generation fighters, Juan Miguel Elorde, will be coming out of hibernation, and he will be getting back into the ring to fight Aruel Romasana at the Flash Grand Ballroom of the Elorde Sports Complex in Parañaque City. Ryan, can you just explain why did Migs go on hibernation, so to speak? His last fight was more than a year ago already.
Well, I imagine it probably had something to do with COVID and the restrictions there. And also that was a very tough fight that he his last fight when he had his title fight against Emmanuel Navarrete. Mig was in over his head, but fought very valiantly. He did himself no disservice with his effort there. I feel that he really did the family legacy proud with his effort. And he is royalty in a lot of ways. His family is royalty in Filipino boxing. But at the end of the day, when that bell rings, you got to fight. And he really held up his end of the bargain. I think that in this fight against Ramasasa, this is going to be a fight where Elorde will be looking to get back in the win column. You work towards another world title run. Can you imagine? I can never imagine Mig or Bai Elorde losing in the building that is named after their grandfather. So talk about like owning the house. They literally own the house. They literally live behind the building. So that's always tough for a fighter to come in and try to knock off one of the Elordes. I think that Ramasasa, he's kind of a trial horse. He's got 9 losses, but he's 8 of them by knockout. I think that he'll be in over his head a bit, but it'll be nice to see Mig Elorde get back in the swing of things. I don't know if his brother Bai Elorde will be back in the ring anytime soon. Juan Martin Elorde. I think he's running for office coming up, so he's got his hands full. But Mig Elorde, it looks like he's going to be given another try for his sport. We're talking. That's sort of our theme today. Is like second generation. Right. I believe this is third generation, and what the Elorde family does to keep the not just the memory of Flash Elorde alive, but to keep the spirit of Filipino boxing, the history, the way that they preserve it. You have to take your hats off to them. They do great work for Philippine boxing.
Well, as you said, Juan Miguel Elorde, Migs Elorde, for a lot of people that know him, will be fighting on the 23rd of October, mga kaibigan. That'll be this coming weekend at the Flash Grand Ballroom of the Elorde Sports Complex in Parañaque City, going up against Eroel Roma Sana. And that is our Fearless Forecast, brought to you by Eastern Communications. And that's the final bell for today's episode of Round by Round, presented by Eastern Communications. I'm Boy at Cisa.
And I'm Ryan Sangalia. We're on Facebook at 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, and on our YouTube channel right after. So like, follow, share, and subscribe now.
On the next edition of our program, it'll be Dennis Principe, Bill Velasco, and yours truly that will be answering the bell. This has been Round by Round, all boxing, all Filipino, all the time. Take care.